Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are delighted to be here with all of you on this Sunday evening to celebrate Mausoleum of Flowers, the brand new poetry book by Daniel B. Summerhill. And I'll introduce Daniel first. Daniel is the assistant professor of poetry and social action, as well as composition studies at California State University, Monterey Bay. He has performed in over 30 states, the UK, and was invited by the US Embassy to guest lecture and perform in South Africa. Daniel has earned a Sharon Olds Fellowship, as well as a fellowship from the Watering Hole. His poetry is published in Columbia Journal, the Academy of American Poetry, Rust and Moth, Button Poetry, Sims Library of Poetry, the Heliobor, among other journals. His work has earned him 2 Pushcart nominations, as well as a Best of the Net nomination. His debut collection is Divine, 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 published by Nomadic Press, which is also available from Charis tonight. And the collection we're celebrating tonight is Mausoleum of Flowers, which was published by Cavan Carey Press in April of 2022. Summerhill holds an MFA in creative writing from the Solstice Low Residency MFA program in Boston College. He is the inaugural Poet Laureate of Monterey County. So welcome, Daniel. We're so glad to have you. And he is joined tonight by W.J. Lofton, who is a queer Black Southern American poet, director, and songwriter. He is the author of A Garden for Black Boys Between the Stages of Soil and Stardust. Lofton's work observes, engages, and celebrates both the erotic and the agape of the Black body and the Black divine. In 2021, he was awarded the LEAP grant by Peabody Award-winning director Ava DuVernay and was named a 2022 Poet in Residence at 100 West in Corsicana, Texas. W.J. Lofton's works of poetry, essay, and film have been featured widely, including Time Magazine, Scalawag Magazine, Meniscus Literary Journal, Obsidian Literature and Arts in the African Diaspora, Connotation Press, Sundance, NPR, Al Jazeera, Urban World Film Festival, and the Black Harvest Film Festival. He loves cast iron skillet cornbread. He is Chicago born, but Alabama raised, and he calls Atlanta, Georgia home. So welcome to you both. It's truly an honor to have y'all here for this conversation, and it's an honor to have folks watching with us. You are welcome to shout out where you're watching from in the chat. You can also ask questions if you like, but mostly we're just going to sit back and enjoy a beautiful reading and a beautiful conversation. A great way to cap what has been a beautiful weekend here in Atlanta, Georgia. So thank you both so much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Brother, it's good to be in space with you.
Yep.
You have gifted us a magnificent work, and I could feel the tenderness and the care. But I would like to start off by asking how you're doing first. I think that's the most important.
Yeah. You know, I think I'm all right.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I'm all right. I had to do a quick little deep dive. But I think I'm all right. I'm better now than I was like yesterday. James Baldwin says hope is invented. So you know, I'm hopeful and
yeah.
So I'm feeling good about that. Being here too. So
yeah, that's good to hear.
How you feeling?
I feel the same way. You know, each day, you know, like hope is invented, like you were saying, and I've been doing this practice where I wake up every morning, and some days I don't believe this thing that I say, but I say today's the best day of my life.
Yeah.
Because I know that's the only I have for sure at that moment.
Yeah.
And so it has to be the best thing, right? So yeah, I'm okay. I'm on my way to better.
Yeah.
So this collection is artful. It is musical. It felt so familiar to me. And I want to begin with the very beginning with the epigraph from Sonia Sanchez and Janae Ayoko, and why you chose those, and what do these Black women artists mean to you and your work?
Yeah. Geez. So first, so the first joint, the Sonia Sanchez joint, was actually, and that epigraph is, I'll go ahead, I guess I'll read it real quick. Do not speak to me of martyrdom, of men who die to be remembered on some perished day. I don't believe in dying, though I too shall die, and violets like castanets will echo me. And that's Sonia Sanchez. And the second epigraph that kind of starts the book is, it ain't perfect, but everything's beautiful here. So that first joint, it was a mission to get it okayed and signed off by the great Sonia Sanchez. But after some mutual connections, I was able to do so, and I was really grateful because that epigraph really speaks to the very first poem in the collection, which is "Do Not Gather Flowers for Me," and really what it's attempting to like situate the readers within is this idea. All right, so Hanif, we can jump right in. So Hanif published this joint, "The Little Devil in America." That first poem, "Do Not Gather Flowers for Me," came after reading one of the essays in that collection, and it was about Black performance as it relates to funerals. And the exact quote that Hanif says in the essay is, "This is how one should be laid to rest, I thought, loud and with memories of their voice, making the sky tremble." And so just thinking about, and again, this collection really came after sitting with my obsession for the past few years, which was like death and demise, specifically death and demise of Black folks, but not in the sense of like trepidation or like, but with more agency, right? With reclamation over what it means to be laid to rest. And so that's where the epigraph, helps frame the entire collection that way. And then the Janae Aiko one, of course, huge fan of Janae Aiko. Like, I think Jalombo is like, in my opinion, one of my top 15 favorite albums of all time, along with Blonde, which I'm sure we'll get into. But that simple little, "It ain't perfect, but everything's beautiful here," really speaks to the resiliency of Black folks, right? Like how can we make like the beauty out of like everything around us being ugly, how we continue to do so, and like what does it mean to be alive and to be briefly gorgeous, as Ocean Vuong was saying, right, for a small amount of time, even though it's not perfect around us. And so both of those kind of quotes or those excerpts kind of like help kind of situate the reader for really the obsession in the entire collection.
I love that you brought Hanif up and the notes on Black performance, because you start the collection with an instruction. And I remember Hanif talking about when Aretha was playing, there became this moment of transcendence from the audience and the performer, and it just meshed into one thing. And so this work is so visceral in a way that the reader is participating in such a way that we think, like Toni Morrison said about James Baldwin, "I begin to think that your thoughts were mine." And so from the beginning of this collection, it is performing something with the reader automatically straight out the gate, which is brilliant. Can we actually hear Mausoleum of Flowers first, or however you would like to read?
Mausoleum of Flowers or Do Not Gather Flowers for me? Which one?
Let's do Not Gather first.
Okay. All right, cool. So the first poem in the collection, "Do Not Gather Flowers for Me. Yet a black Cadillac first, 100. A Buick will do if old enough. It's all about the body and what it's born anyway. Line them up, out front. Then let the chrysanthemums, roses, and carnations spill out each window. Make it magnificent. Rev the engines until they are voiceless, until there is no gas left in the cylinders, until a mushroom cloud of gray-black exhaust can be seen from the heavens. Anything this large and dying must have God's attention."
Beautiful. When I was reading that, you incorporate so much of the spectacle of the funeral, right? And how I think to do that is such a generous act without also making it a caricature of the
Yeah.
real thing. So how did that feel? Because I could feel the care as you delivered this, but because I'm familiar with how things go,
Mm-hmm.
but how did it feel navigating yourself and also thinking about the reader, if you were thinking about the reader?
Yeah. So, they say like funerals are for the living, right? Not for the
Mhm.
dead. And so, like in such, like everything we think of as a funeral is like performative in a lot of ways. And it's
Mhm.
really like, again, a place for the living. So that poem, Do Not Gather Flowers for Me, is trying to like really subvert that idea and think about what would it mean for like a dead person to actually speak? Like, what would they say, right? During like, a funeral or a session, that kind of like celebration. And, it's not necessarily like a call for help, right, or a call for like or an appeal to God, but rather like again, like Hanif said, what are the ways are to be laid to rest? Then with memories of the sky trembling from from a voice, right, from my voice, and so really like it's an attempt at thinking about like how can I reclaim even my voice, even in death? Like how can I like have something, a last word, something to say, something to chronicle even as I've left this earth, right, in my physical material self, right. So I don't know if the reader as a reader was thought of, but I think an audience as a viewer of this performance was in mind, right? Like as you said, instructive, right? So it's like the title of the poem is "Do Not Gather Flowers for Me."
Yeah.
That's also the very first line of the poem. So it is very declarative that way, right? Like instructive, like, nah, I don't want flowers, rev the engines, right? Like make the sky tremble,
Yeah.
right? Like I want the homies to pull up in their biggest and widest cars, right? But like the biggest rims and rev the engines, right? 'Cause that's how I want to be kind of laid to rest. Um, yeah,
So much of the collection speaks on death and demise,
yeah,
and as we are like constantly seeing like shootings, we're constantly seeing focusing on the pandemic, right?
yeah,
How did writing these poems either make you consider your own death
yeah.
and those around you? Because I feel like it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And again, when like so maybe 2/3 of these poems were actually written in the summer of 2020, the whole George Floyd joint, right? Like, and all of the other right? Extrajudicial killings at the hands of the state. So a bunch of death, right? And then a bunch of death being broadcasted. And then we're in the midst of a pandemic. So naturally, like we're indoors and we're like really inward facing. And so many of these poems became what was birthed out of the obsession with death, with witnessing death. But again, I didn't want it to be like this like really vulnerable or I don't know, like less than kind of a person thinking about death, but rather somebody who has agency, who has like power over their own body, right? And I hope to die before the world does. I hope the world outlives me. I don't want my position on death to be dictated by my relationship to the dead. Or in other words, I don't believe anything should die, but we do, right? And I think society has taken the cheap route when it comes to the fact that we are non-permanent, right, or non-infinite. We place death in like the furthest part of our brain, and live like every second of the moment isn't the most important item in the world, and it seems that the greatest fear of any man is to that any man can kind of confront is to confront death and then overcome it. And again, not to be like invincible, right, or
To embrace it.
yeah, like James Baldwin
Mhm,
says, scared of death to walk towards it, right? And
mhm,
that's the
mhm, mhm,
basis of Mausoleum of Flowers, to confront death, not in any particular like heroic way or like a way that looks to solve the age-old mystery of of death, but instead to wrestle with the ideas, of death. Um, writer Christos poses the question, writing is mostly discarding fear, isn't it? Writing is also how we make sense of, wrestle with, and ultimately confront the things we might not otherwise confront. So what better way to confront our ultimate conundrum, right? Like than thinking about death, right? Kevin Young has a collection called Book of Hours and does a similar thing, right? Like, it's not a unique thing, but currently our obsession like with capitalism has forced Black bodies to become fuel, which of course makes our current like obsession with demise unique in that we are the fuel. Black folks are the fuel, right? As Ta-Nehisi Coates would say. So anyway, so much of the discussion of death is about like our current demise and our current kind of conundrum at the hands of the state.
Because that's so much of that's in like your frontal lobe right now. Death and demise, or it was. I'm not sure your relationship to it now, presently. But how did that make you more urgent to be more honest in your poems? Because I think death sobers us up in a way, and I could feel the honesty and the vulnerability in the poems in such a way that it's like we know you're not lying, right? This is like sharp.
Yeah. Yo, listen, hopefully I did the diligence of telling the truth as much as I can. And hopefully I was as honest as possible. But also honesty and truth are non-objective things, right? So like our only understanding of truth and honesty is like the quest of those things. So not really like finding out like X thing is the truth, but rather I'm gonna be on this journey, and me deciding to be full steam ahead on this journey is the truth, right? I'm gonna say James Baldwin's name like 12 more times before this.
As we should.
But he was like, yo, we don't know what the truth is, but we do know what a lie is. And so like when I sit down to write, like I know what a lie is, right? But the writing is actually me wrestling with the truth, me attempting at the truth, right? And that's a vulnerable place to be in, right? Which is why writers, nobody in their right mind would be writing. But then you become one, or you discover you are one, and then you don't have a choice, right? So yeah.
So I'm thinking about like so much of the conversation of death and truthfulness and what is perceived as true, and a lot of that is rooted in fear. Could we jump into Fear that you wrote after Kendrick Lamar?
Oh man, yeah. I don't read that one very often. It usually scares folks because they don't have the context. But I'll I want to do it. Thank you for asking me to read that, Joy. So this is Fear, and it's after Pulitzer Prize winning Kendrick Lamar's album Damn, in which Fear appears on that album. Fear after Kendrick Lamar. In the savannah, a calf watches a matriarch heave an acacia branch with her trunk, after moments earlier plucking a blade of grass from the earth, and does not consider her body a non sequitur. I'll beat your ass is malleable. What is a good metaphor for an elephant? Thick palm wrecking a world for a moment, then cleaning the wound with rubbing alcohol and Vaseline. Milkweed and black-eyed Susans endure the winter. I too am perennial. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish them with a rod, they will not die. I'll beat your ass, embalming fluid, not a fear tactic. I'll beat your ass if I beat your ass in twice and you're still here. Oh, little black belt, you make everything more tangible. Death is no monster here, but the goal, an elastic holy grail, sculpted over an entire adolescence.
Yeah.
That's
Can we go to that last stanza one more time? Can we revisit that?
Yo. You want me to read it one more time?
One more time.
Yeah. Oh, little black belt, you make everything more tangible. Death is no monster here, but the goal, an elastic holy grail sculpted over an entire adolescence.
For those who may not know the context, could you dive into that?
Into the fear joint too? Yo, so most Black folks know the context, right? Like, I'll beat your ass. I'll beat your ass twice, and you still here, right? You know the whole idea of like capital punishment, of sparing a rod and beating a child. And so here is thinking about like, this is the microcosm of like what it is to exist worldwide, globally as a Black person. So here it's turning like the idea of like, of discipline from this maternal kind of like instinct of discipline, and like using the extended metaphor of an elephant, right? Like, so this is a true story. I literally was watching like something on like, I don't know, Animal Planet or something like that. I was watching some random stuff. And the elephant, like, plucked a blade of grass from the ground, and then like yanked a tree down. And like, so I'm like, how like, delicate, how granular do you have to be able to pull something as small as a blade of grass from the ground, but also to be able to like shake a tree, to move an entire tree, right? So I thought about that, and like thought about what it means to be like a maternal like disciplinarian, right? Like, what does it mean for my mom, I don't know, to pop me when I was 5 years old? Like, how is that, like, how can I kind of connect those two, that metaphor, what I experienced? I didn't get whoopings actually growing up, but just think about like capital punishment and all that, and it's like the most gentle yet most affectionate like form of maternity. And I don't agree with capital punishment too, to make it apparent, right? Like, I think there's ways beyond like putting your hand on children, right?
Right.
The attempt at preservation of a human being by providing discipline was an interesting concept to really unpack. So that last stanza is like, yo, death by maternal like discipline is the goal here, right? Sculpted over an entire adolescence. I'd rather my mother preserve me through discipline than for me to be ended by something else, right? So like, it's this idea that I want to be preserved by that fear of mama, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what Kendrick was getting at, right, in the song. It's just like, what does it mean? What does it mean like for love to be explored in this violent way?
So I'm thinking about the complexity of this, because there's Bell Hooks has this thing that says love and violence cannot coexist. But now it's been challenged that like, in order for me to preserve you, sometimes I must be violent towards you.
Yeah. Or so we think.
Or so we think, right?
Yeah.
And or if we are not using violence physically, there must be something that strikes fear in you, right? Like the tone of a voice, right? If a child is walking towards traffic, before a belt can catch them, a voice should, right? And so I think it's about like the balancing of love and fear, because they're both vital.
Yeah.
And it preserves. But you do this tenderness in Mausoleum of Flowers.
Yeah.
Where I think, for my perception, I thought you were in conversation with Genesis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe,
whole collection.
And, yeah, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm watching you as a Black father subvert the fear into something else. Right? It's like, let's just dive into that, and then we can dive into the conversation about Mausoleum.
The poem, right? Yep.
Yeah.
That's a good segue. Yeah. So this is the last poem in the collection, and it's the title poem. It's also probably one of the shortest poems too. All right. Mausoleum of Flowers. Split earth's rotting wound, your body, a mausoleum hanging over its lip, like a maid thing. Plucking flowers on our walks, you study them close, stumbling over your brand new feet. They'll die before we make it home, I don't say. You are a botanist and know all about self-preservation. No, there is no gray in death, and you are very much alive. Yeah.
Wow. What does that poem mean for you?
Yeah, that poem is the entire collection, right? Like, going back to, you have an epigraph in the collection too. When we thought the world, what is it? When we thought the
When we
world
thought the world was ending, flowers began to bloom.
flowers began blooming, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's what that poem and the entire collection is. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, this is like my obsession, but like thinking about death and demise with agency. But ultimately, by the end of the collection, it's this idea that like flowers are blooming from this mausoleum, right? This thing that signals like death, signals the end, yet flowers are blooming from this thing. And that's what I thought about, during that summer of 2020, right? Witnessing death, seeing death, hearing about death, right? Like experiencing death, all that, and like feeling it, like physically. But then also taking walks with my 3-year-old, right? And she loves flowers. She loves to pick flowers. And I'm like, yo, the flower's gorgeous, but if you pick it, it's not gonna last forever. And so really, like that in and of itself is like the extended metaphor for the entire collection of poems, right? Again, Ocean was like, yo, on earth, we're briefly gorgeous. What does it mean for a flower? On earth, it's briefly gorgeous. What does it mean for my daughter, Genesis? On earth, she's briefly gorgeous, right? Like, what does it mean to exist as a Black person? On earth, we're briefly gorgeous, right? So like, shout out to Ocean Vuong for also inspiring, thematically, like this collection. But yeah, it's thinking about the contrast between like a mausoleum and like this booming idea of flowers.
You have mastered this technique of, when I was reading the collection, I felt like I could fall completely backwards into the poems, and I know that you would catch me. And it was in such a way that some of the poems were really intense, but there was always just enough balance of, there was a constant I love you in the poem. There's a constant I'm holding you up. You are not witnessing this pain alone. Could you talk more about that? Like how you just you're able to handle us and yourself, I'm assuming, with such tenderness and compassion.
Yeah, I guess what you said at the end kind of like speaks to it really, and that is, poetry ain't nothing like without your folks. And so when I write these poems, and I know like sometimes it is tough, but like really, so Elizabeth Azevedo, I was at AWP, the Association for Writers and Writing Programs, the conference, and Elizabeth, this is going to connect to your question, I promise. Elizabeth Azevedo was asked, yo, do you imagine like an audience when I think it was when you read or perhaps when you write? Either way, like her response was that I think about the audience that's not my people, that's not the intended audience, as like part of banquet. And like folks are there, like you're there to enjoy the banquet, the food and all that, but you're not there to be celebrated, right? So the folks that appear in this collection, the folks that this book is for, like my people, the people that like these poems kind of chronicle, that's the audience, and that's who I'm thinking about. And these poems mean nothing to me if it can't duly and justly kind of honor the people whom they're about, right? Like if these poems can't be read by the homies who struggle and appear in these poems, they're like, what am I doing? Right? Like, poets are the like true historians. So if I can't chronicle and like document like the things that I experienced, that the homies experienced, that my community, that my people experience, then like, what am I doing? Right? Like Nina Simone was like, yo, the duty of an artist is to reflect the time. She was like, listen, I don't care if you're a painter, a sculptor, a musician, I don't care. Like, it's your job to reflect the times, right? And James Baldwin, Langston Hughes, right, was a people's poet. Like, what does it mean to be a writer if you're not in community via the language you use? And so thinking about like your question, like, the poems being able to kind of hold the reader, I think that's a way that like empathy works, right? You think your struggles, your problems are your own until you read. And so it's like, how can I like, attempt at making sense of something to where it might also help someone else make sense of something too, right? So again, all of it is an attempt. All of it is a trial by error, right? Like at wrestling with things. And again, hopefully folks are carried some way in the poems and the work. Yeah.
And speaking of like attempts, like we get to see you attempt to be in conversation successfully. with so many artists throughout the collection.
Yeah.
And you also play as witness. And so I would love for us to jump into Frank's opus, Self-Control.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
can
that,
we
I'll
hear
jump
that?
into that one too. Yeah, I'll jump into it and then I guess we'll talk after.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta find it.
You were writing down. I mean,
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
appreciate it. That actually, that's one of the, so I guess let me preface all those joints. So in the collection, there is a suite of poems called Frank's Opus. And they're in conversation, as WJ mentioned, with some songs from Frank Ocean's Blonde album. And those poems were actually going to be like an entirely separate project. But then I wrote, the rest of the poems outside of those Frank Ocean joints. And I thought it was really fitting for like this idea of like a modulated life to be juxtaposed against like the ideas of death and demise, which is what I think Frank Ocean's Blood album is. Like it's this idea of like this modulated kind of like life. So anyways, all right, Frank's opus, Self-Control. The bridge floors me. Each time I collect enough courage to play it all the way through. This anxiety wants to hold onto almost white morning sunslit through canyon live oak. We crash at dawn, fall in love backwards, as if tomorrow was an uninvited third wheel. It's more glorious this way. The sun searching for us and all. Your shadow, a kestrel flying in place. Your body already leaving. You tilt your head toward me to say, nothing gold can stay. And yet, here we are, again, dancing, as if music is the shadow of a figure just out of sight. You are not near, but this song is, again.
Yes.
I was going through some stuff, man, and yeah, that poem.
And you're so, once again, like we see your generosity, and it is more glorious this way. The sun searching for us and all. It's, you always invite us in such a way. Like I feel like when I was reading your poems, you were always at the door, open, saying, "Come in."
Yeah.
What does this mean to you? What is Frank and his work? What is this particular conversation with the song Self-Control?
Yeah, so much to say. So first of all, again, I think so Blonde is probably could be like top 3 of my favorite albums of all time. And Rolling Stone has it like top 50 best albums of all time. Right? So like you're like top 50 on Rolling Stone, it's like you gotta be doing something. And again, like Blonde included in here as that conversation is really this idea of like that modulated life against the backdrop of death, right? Which is in the Mausoleum of Flowers. And Blonde is really like a visceral experience, from the production to Frank's vocals to the precision to the organization. Like it's truly a gem. And so what better way to cut against the grain of death, which is sharp and unforgiving and permanent, than to explore adolescence, right? To explore love and light and wonder through an intimate conversation with Frank, right? Like this Frank was written before the other poems, as I said, right? And it was originally going to be its own project, but then I added it to Mausoleum of Flowers because of the juxtaposition and contrast. And so thinking about Blonde and thinking about how really, in many ways, like your idea about how you can like fall back into Mausoleum of Flowers and still be kind of cradled and handled, I think about that same thing with Blonde, right? Like at any point you can like, be held by one of them joints that appear in Blonde. And so 8 or so poems that are in Mausoleum of Flowers are not even like a comprehensive conversation. There's many more conversations to be had, but I think like the idea of love and light, but like explored beyond like the kind of superficial ways we think about it is important, right? Like, Bell Hooks is all about, that conversation. And again, when I was writing these joints, I was reading all kind of bell hooks and all kind of James Bowen and listening to Blonde on vinyl, you know. And so really, I was attempting to have a conversation with Frank and where Frank could have been when he was writing the lyrics to those songs. Yeah.
So now I want to kind of hop to another one of Frank's joints, Godspeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Yo, I'll read it. I'll read that joint. That's one of my favorites in the collection. Frank's opus, Godspeed. Fault lines are stronger than any faith I've ever mustered. There are mountains I do not move. And this isn't a mountain so much as it is a hill. And this kind of love isn't movement so much as it is biblical destruction. Perhaps our prayers are too many and God is too few to collect them all. Perhaps an aftershock is the earth's invocation for less movement. I know my voice is no match for an earthquake, but the premise of prayer is not to watch the sky open, but to feel the ground shake beneath my feet without asking. Prayer is not asking. Prayer is not about asking. Prayer is a tremor we don't have a grand enough name for.
Yeah. So, because so much of this collection, or a lot of the collection, deals with death, demise, love, and joy. How does this? In what ways are you having conversation with your spirituality, with God, wherever you want to reference? How did that impact the writing? Also, how did that impact you outside of the writing?
Yeah. You know, it's so funny, man. I'm gonna mention James Baldwin again. But James Baldwin's story is, you know, of course, a fascinating one when it comes to like spirituality, religion, God, all that, right? Like grew up in the church. You know, stepfather was an abusive, you know, preacher.
Yeah.
James himself was a pastor, a preacher for many years. And so similarly, I grew up in a church. I grew up a Christian. Grew up, you know, believing in God, and I still very much do. But as I got older, you know, the Bible says to ask questions. The Bible says to check me out. God says check me out, right?
Check me out, yeah.
You check me out, right? Like, let's see what this is about, right? And a lot of folks don't do that, right? You know, they fall into the, you know, doing so is like sacrilegious. To check God out. But I think having audacity to do so is really what like growth looks like, right? Having the audacity to kind of explore spirituality in a way that, you know, sometimes bucks up against maybe what you believe or what you thought. That's the only way growth happens, is in those uncomfortable spaces. And so like my own experience, like with spirituality, is wrestling with, is questioning, is asking, you know, those big intimate, you know, questions. And what you see in Mausoleum of Flowers are those questions. Is like, yo God, you know, there's a poem O for O, you know, I'll read it real quick.
Yeah.
It speaks to your question really well. Because it's really, you know, about asking the questions that are sometimes taboo, right? Or thought of as other. The church mamas would like throw a fit if you ask these questions, right? So it's like, what does it mean to have those questions? O for O. You pray and use O as a prefix to God. Leave O dangling between your mouth and God's ear. Leave interpretation as endearment, as distance, as plea. O for O. O for interjection, for oxygen, as in, yo, God, here I am, gasping for air, please. Yeah, yo, I'm gonna leave it there. Yeah.
And another reason, you know, I felt so safe in this collection, although the collection itself is not safe, right? It's very much like asking these hard questions and making us sit and reckon. you say like the purpose is to self-excavate. And so what remains of ourselves can we pull up out of these poems, hold up to the light and say, this is who we are. And how do we sit with those things?
Yep.
And you challenge so many things. You challenge authority. You challenge our ideas about God with relationships too.
Yep.
I think about the tenderness between you and Genesis.
Yeah.
And I also think about, capital punishment and how you handle all these things. I would also like to think about the poem Mama.
Yep.
And can we dive into that one?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite joints. So this poem, Mama, was written after I had a conversation with my mom. And she told me that she had never experienced like sustained happiness. And I always like to differentiate like happiness and joy, like joy being like sustained, elongated happiness. And she was like, yo, I've never experienced that. And so it really broke my heart to hear that, like, hear her say that like she's never experienced sustained joy. But it also made me curious, like, what does that mean, right? And so this is what came of that kind of excavation. Mama knows what it's like to hold and not be held. Mama Nancy, who is not my mama, but is the oldest mama I have a name for. In this way, history is young, not because it is young, but because it goes only as far back as our stories do. And I'd like to think memory counts for something. 3 women separate her from my mama, each of them a comma. Each of them should have been a semicolon, but we know genealogy isn't forgiving that way. I'm the son of all 4, and I am told by mama that her earliest recall of joy was being handed a quarter to buy a hamburger and still having 15 cents left over to buy penny candy. This girl, a woman, a mother, who has never been to the bottom of the earth, and not that any long-haul flight will buy happiness, but being awakened by the unswallowed sun over the Southern Ocean seems like a cheat code for sustained joy. I say sustained in the sense that the sunrise is the only infinite rhythm I've seen. This isn't a poem about joy, so much as it is a poem about dying without ever knowing it. But mama, you've always stricken me as someone who champions distance over depth, or faith over long suffering. In this way, I suppose joy isn't the antonym to pain, but the antibody. It is 1998, and you have just given me a pink food stamp, enough to buy a zebra cake, Kool-Aid jammer, and 3 packs of now and laters. The walk to the corner store, my faith. The slow skip back home, small joy. Here, my perception of small is grand enough to get me through the immensity of summer. How my mother summoned jubilance to share with me its blood. It is 2018, and I think of my trip to South Africa as a metaphor for food stamps. The flight, my faith. The flight, my joy. What I don't deserve, not considered here. The miles between me and the earth, stretched faith, carrying me back home. I search out my window for land, but find nothing green, just blue. Plenty blue to feel small enough to remember my small mama with outstretched hands, waiting for a quarter, for joy, a girl, a woman. Dear mama, your water will come, and the sun will brass knuckle its way out of the ocean with enough triumph to make you feel golden. The ocean is the only constant here. It delivers us all. I imagine it'll deliver you too. If not you, your body. If not your joy, your pain. It will carry it in its mouth back to shore like a flood. Yeah.
Mama's one of those poems that made me feel like I was back in, like with my mother. And a lot of the poems for me, I feel like I'm walking through your summer memories.
Yeah.
it felt like the collection felt like a long summer day for me, and I got to experience different things on the block happening.
Yo.
And inside this poem, it's just like the food stamp, the zebra cake, like the act of going, right?
Nope.
And I guess as you were excavating or walking through these memories, like how were you able to allow yourself the agency to, yes, explore the memory, but also still allow it to be cohesive throughout the entire collection?
Yeah. Good question too. You know, my memory is terrible. Like, so I have to do a lot of writing down. And recently I've been, so that conversation I had with my mom came because I was like, yo, I need to start like consciously like talking to my mother. And my grandfather, who also appears in the collection, I didn't get a chance to do that as much as I wanted to as an adult. Like as a kid growing up, we had very brief, paternal interactions. He was grandpa and like I was the grandchild. So it was never like, I never got to like pick his brain until like much later. And then like he passed away after, before I was able to get enough, wisdom from him. And so with my mom, I'm like, yo, now I need to like talk to my mom, and I need to like really explore like her entire life in a way that not only like helps me understand her, but helps me understand myself better. So then those memories that appear in that poem is really me trying to like recall my smallest, spurts of joy, and trying to compare those with like what my mom may have experienced as like those small, spaces of joy. So going to the corner store with a pink food stamp and remembering like, yo, if I work this out right, I can go home with like a whole meal, right? I can get like 2 bags of chips, something.
Yeah.
Like we're good, like with this, you know what I mean? And so like thinking back to my mama, who like was around when like penny candy was a thing, and her mom, my grandmother, would hand her like a quarter, and that was that was her pink food stamp. She could go to the store and map out her thing, right? And so like really like I was allowing myself to really like get kiddie, to get like really childlike in thinking about like what joy is. And because I think often we think about like joy and happiness as like really like, I don't know, huge like things, but it could be like some of the smallest like experiences that are like those adulterated, unstained moments of joy. And so hopefully like the poem did a good job of like trying to like wrestle with what joy is. And then if not, again, like my promise, my prayer for my mother at the end of the joint was like, yo, if this water doesn't carry away your pain, or bring you joy, hopefully it'll at least carry away your pain. That's some solace.
So we have 10 minutes left, but I have like 2 things I want to talk about. So this is obviously a collection of poetry, but it's an album for me also. And I can see the musical influences, right? Kanye, Kendrick, Frank. Obviously Hanif has his hand in here. Why these individuals? Why are they significant?
They're the folks that make me think the most. They're the folks that like, make me feel a certain way. And poetry is a bodily art form, right? Like, so there's music in there because like music is in our body. Rhythm is who we are. And so like naturally, like as a Black writer, like more than likely you're gonna have some music in your joint, just because poetry is a bodily art form. We're musical instruments. Poetry is like audible, right? It's oral. So it's like, yo, music is gonna happen. So then you match that up with who were my textbooks growing up, right? Like Tupac was my textbook growing up. I learned alternative rhyme from A Tribe Called Quest, right? Like I didn't read Shakespeare growing up, right? I read Shakespeare much later because I had to, but it wasn't like, yo, here's Shakespeare, learn meter. So like, nah, I learned music, I learned rhythm, I learned syntax, I learned all that from music, from listening to rappers, to listening to vocalists, right? And so yeah, the poem, I mean the collection is a bunch of it's an album, right? It is an homage to the folks that make me think, right? Music is what makes me think the most. If it's not James Baldwin, right, or Ocean Vuong or something like Toni Morrison, It's a song. It's a 1920s, jazz song that makes me want to write.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm trying to ask questions, trying to be in conversation with the folks that are creating the commission. Yeah.
So we have Kanye, Kendrick, and Frank in this. Are there other artists that you are interested in having conversations with in your poetry?
Well, that's good. That's real good.
Because I'm always thinking about Luther.
Yeah. All those folks on my wall back there. Minnie Riperton, James Brown, Leon Bridges, Kirby, Shaka Khan, man.
Yeah.
So like, whoever else, there's so many. There's so many. Like if you listen to Sudan Archives is also a person. Like alternatively, there's a gang of folks, man. Janae,
have you listened to Mustafa, the poet?
I have.
Yeah. How you feel about?
Yep. Doing the work. That's the poetry's a bodily art form. Man.
Yeah. So I want to make sure like people know they can ask questions. We have a few minutes left, but if not, I know that you have a bonus track for us. That has not been shared. But before that, can we get Sitting in a Wicker Chair, and then can we end with the bonus track?
That one, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm gonna read that one from paper. So this one, sitting in a wicker chair against floral wallpaper in Oakland heat. There is a portrait of Huey Newton in my church. It's Communion Sunday, and Mama has on her good shoes with the gold links. The Jackson boys are dressed to the nines, their pants starch creased and hovering above their snake skins like halos. Huey's in a black beret, but gone anyway. What's blood without a body to show for it? In the States, what is more righteous than a gun and a spear sitting at the left hand of God on a wicker chair in Oakland? Wicker chair out front since before COINTELPRO bludgeoned the Panthers. We've come because it's Easter and we're hungry. Inside, Marvin Gaye's falsetto seeps in like a gentle flood, and the kitchen becomes a small Soul Train line for 12 minutes instead. All these bodies bending like prayer. Black means religion is second only to dancing. The day America stormed America, I was black and in exile for yanking a tulip from the ground. I shouldn't have, but wanted something more beautiful to die before I did. Call it civil disobedience.
Wow.
And then, I have a new joint that I'll read, and it's actually after Hanif Abdurraqib. Some of us who I love are dead. Some of those who I love are dead. And this is called All My Prayers Sound Like a Chief Keef record. Near 152, the reservoir has no water. Well, amen. Where I'm from, a group of black folks is a two-step or a funeral, a circadian rhythm, a small slaughter. 43 miles to 152, a balloon in the draft says it must return home before the streetlights come on. A boy tells me he believes in God because his mother didn't die when she was choked to death. While peeling a pomegranate, my uncle's words, nothing good comes without hard work. I can't recall if this was before or after his body burst into a field of lilies. My mother coaxing my tears into a small offering. The soil shimmers, a mausoleum of new. I don't know death, only grief. If I don't sleep, tomorrow will come anyway. I apologize. I'm not in the business of disproving miracles. If we're protesting death, it's too late. If we're looking for God, it's too soon. I apologize. Heaven has all my favorite people. And the dead don't desire justice, only ghosts. And when they leave, even their shadows got a sound to them. Praise Frank Ocean's falsetto, Moon River's second chorus dangling from the chord progression like a tiny poltergeist. Praise the ghost that keep me suspended between here and somewhere holier. Praise the pallbearers, how the dead are responsible for preserving the dead. Praise Jimmy's cigarette tapping like Morse code. Praise No Name in the Street and all of its cousins. Praise the scaffold. Praise the hand. Off Highway 1, there is a place where calla lilies run away into the ocean. The waves freestyle their horizon. And this story, the boy is a blade. I apologize. All my prayers sound like a Chief Keef record. Some I love are dead. Some I love eulogize themselves by dancing to their childhood names. On cadence, will you hold my hand while the water rises? Will you fall to your knees for prayer?
Wow. Thank you. This has reminded the entire book, and just this conversation just reminds me of, like, to quote your salvation, I am a boy again and don't mind at all. So thank you for being generous with us. Thank you for holding us. It's been wonderful sharing space with you, as always. I want to welcome ER back so he can tell the folks how to purchase this wonderful collection. But yeah, it's been great. Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Well, appreciate it. Big love.
Thank you both so much. I want to encourage anybody watching tonight to go ahead and click this teal button at the bottom of the screen to buy Mausoleum of Flowers from Charis. You can also buy Daniel's first book from Charis if you have already gotten Mausoleum of Flowers, if you pre-ordered it. But somehow if you missed his first book, check that one out as well. You can get that through that teal link as well. We want to thank everybody for watching with us tonight. I'll be putting this up on YouTube in a couple days, so definitely share that link and let folks know if they love poetry and didn't know this was happening. It's never too late. We enjoy we like many people to watch this over a long period of time. So I am very grateful to both of you for this beautiful event, and I hope that you both stay safe and well.
Thank you so much.
I'll be safe.